I'll be joined shortly to speak with Zaid Jilani of The Intercept, his article covering Sean Spicer and the looming threat of conflict with Iran based on, I don't want to use the word fake news, but misinformation is actually far more accurate. Intentional misinformation from Press Secretary Sean Spicer. So we'll talk about his article and when he joins us at around 9:15. I'm getting ready to be joined by Zaid Jilani of The Intercept to discuss his article on Iran, Sean Spicer, and Yemen. If you haven't had a chance to read it, you should go over to The Intercept and take a look at it. And actually, he's joining me now. Zaid, how are you today, man? Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Ben.
Thanks so much. I'm sure most people who follow me and follow us on Twitter, they probably know about you, but tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll jump right into the article.
Sure. So I'm a reporter at The Intercept. I've been doing this kind of work for a little bit under a decade. I've been either working in advocacy journalism or working in advocacy as an organizer for about that period of time since I was 21, where I started at Think Progress. And I also worked most recently, before coming to The Intercept, I worked for a website called Alternet, which also does sort of progressive news and views.
Awesome. Yeah, and you made it out of Think Progress, man. I'm sorry. Let me not start that. All right, let's talk about your article, right? So Sean Spicer, and I have the clip. I want to play the clip. I actually want to start with Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn came out in a press conference yesterday, and he made some very interesting. I'm gonna be as unhyperbolic as I possibly can and let him speak for himself. This is Michael Flynn first, and then we'll be listening to Sean Spicer. Here we go.
Recent Iranian actions involving a provocative ballistic missile launch and an attack against a Saudi naval vessel conducted by Iran-supported Houthi militants underscore what should have been clear to the international community all along about Iran's destabilizing behavior across the entire Middle East. The recent ballistic missile launch is also in defiance of UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which calls upon Iran not to undertake any activity related to ballistic missiles designed to be capable of delivering nuclear weapons, including launches using such ballistic missile technology. These are just the latest of a series of incidents in the past 6 months in which Houthi forces that Iran has trained and armed have struck Emirati and Saudi vessels and threaten United States and allied vessels transiting the Red Sea. In these and other similar activities, Iran continues to threaten U.S. friends and allies in the region. The Obama administration failed to respond adequately to Tehran's malign actions, including weapons transfers, support for terrorism, and other violations of international norms. The Trump administration condemns such actions by Iran that undermine security, prosperity, and stability throughout and beyond the Middle East, and which places American lives at risk. President Trump has severely criticized the various agreements reached between Iran and the Obama administration, as well as the United Nations, as being weak and ineffective. Instead of being thankful to the United States in these agreements, Iran is now feeling emboldened. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice. Thank you.
So, very bellicose statement, very provocative. And the reason I wanted to play in the context is because Sean Spicer immediately came afterwards, and not only yesterday, but today as well, essentially conflating Iran with Yemen, conflating their ballistic missile with a ballistic missile that's capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, which would have been a violation of the agreement with Iran. He did a lot of conflation, which seemed to be very convenient for someone to move us in the direction of another war. Tell me about your research and what you found in your article.
Yeah, sure. So Sean Spicer actually was asked about what Michael Flynn was saying, because the Trump administration didn't really make clear what it even meant to be on notice, right? What are you going to do? Is that a some sort of talk for escalating sanctions? Is it some kind of, you're going to put more ships off their coast or something like that? What are you going to do? And basically, his response was to list a number of things he thought they were doing that was problematic. And it was really interesting. He said something like, "Oh, they had a sort of, they had sort of an interdiction with or an incident with our naval vessel."
Right.
And it was really interesting because no such thing happened,
Right.
under the Trump administration. There was no, the incident he was actually referring to was actually referred to by Flynn the day earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And, there were two things wrong about what Spicer said. One, it wasn't Iranians. It was a group called the Houthis who
Right.
have been a part of a civil war in Yemen, and Saudi Arabia is on the other side of that. And they had targeted a Saudi ship.
Mm-hmm.
America and Iran both were not even part of this,
Right.
in any way. And it's really interesting. Someone actually did later call and say, "Hey, no, it was the Saudis," and he would backtrack and say, "Okay, it was the Saudis," but they didn't backtrack on the Houthi Iran part, which is a really important part too, because making that conflation also would imply that, hey, that maybe Iran is at war with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia
Right.
is our ally, so we need to be doing things. So, was it sort of done with malign intent, or is he just being sloppy? I mean, who knows? I think that unfortunately, in the United States, you can get away with saying really hyperbolic things about Iran, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Actually, Alcee Hastings, who's a Democrat from Florida,
Yeah.
He actually introduced a bill, his first bill of the Trump era, I guess, in January. He introduced a bill authorizing military force against Iran. It has 0 co-sponsors. No one, not even any Republicans, have jumped on it. I don't know what he's doing, but unfortunately, bellicosity against Iran is a long-time tradition, and it seems like the Trump administration may be taking it on full swing.
Yeah, I've got a call out to Alcee Hastings' office. He's my former congressman, and when I looked up the bill that you're referring to as the authorization for use of force against Iran, and I saw his name there, I'm like, what in the world is Alcee Hastings doing? Turns out he actually sponsored another one in 2015. It seems to be a consistent theme for Congressman Hastings, but it's we're handing now potential authorization of use of force over to Donald Trump, who seems to want, at a minimum, increased tensions with Iran, to say the least. I want to play the clip of Sean Spicer, and I think it captures the moment that you're referring to. Let's listen in.
So I think General Flynn was really clear yesterday that Iran has violated the joint resolution, that Iran's additional hostile actions that it took against our Navy vessel are ones that we are very clear are not going to sit by and take. I think that we will have further updates for you on those additional actions, but clearly we wanted to make sure that Iran understood that they are on notice. This is not going unresponded to. John.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. Yes. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry. Yes.
So there, all right, there he is, right? Making that conflation, and he's corrected on something that's a major correction, right? There's a total magnitudes of order difference between the Houthi rebels firing on a Saudi vessel and Iran firing on an American vessel, but he kind of corrects it in a kind of undertoned kind of way.
Right,
but
and
this is significant.
Right, and even when that reporter, who, by the way, I believe was Major Garrett, who used to be at Fox and now at CBS, even when that reporter corrected him, he still didn't correct it all the way, because the only part was the vessel part. He didn't point out that Iranians didn't even do this, right? Actually, when you're talking about the Houthi rebels, there are some connections, especially since Saudi Arabia intervened. Iran wanted to ramp up what it was doing there. It's kind of almost a natural rivalry and reaction. But the reality is that it's been reported, for example, that the Houthi rebels, when they took over the government in Yemen, that Iran actually told them not to do that. They didn't think it was a good idea.
Right.
So it's not like, Iran says, jump, and they say how high. I mean, they're a distinct group that at times has actually been allied to Saudi Arabia as well. So it's a really, really problematic assertion to make. And someone who's a spokesperson for our country when they're saying things like that, because Trump hasn't said anything about this, and the State Department doesn't even have a spokesperson right now. So really, it's on Sean Spicer, and he can't afford to be that sloppy just to try to make a belligerent case about Iran. And by the way, both Spicer and Flynn are talking about Iran. Oh, Iran's doing this, Iran's doing that. Let's just remember, last week we issued a total ban on Iranians coming to the United States, right? It's not like we didn't provoke them at all, right? Like that was a really an action that Obama and Bush didn't do, or Clinton didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
This was, a major provocation, and they're just pretending that didn't even happen, So the story they're telling is far from complete, and it does set up a mindset which I think Michael Flynn at least seems to have, of seeing, hey, Iranian action everywhere. They're behind everything in the Middle East, and we have to, do more against them in the Middle East, because otherwise, who knows what will happen. But the reality is that these are supposed to be careful diplomatic situations, and when you say these things and when you do things like what they did last week, it could make things a lot worse, and it could turn a situation where really Iran and the United States do have shared interests, and there are things they should be working together with. And the last administration towards the end started doing some of that. Like, we could end up ruining a lot of that by doing this stuff. Forget whether we actually go all the way to like having a military conflict with them.
Right.
God forbid we do. But there's so many things short of that which we could just ruin in sort of a difficult situation. And I think the Trump administration, I talked to PJ Crowley today, who was Clinton's State Department person. And I asked him his thoughts about this, and he was saying something like, well, maybe, over time they'll mature and things like that. And maybe that's the case. Maybe they haven't even held like a principals meeting of their National Security Council. They haven't assigned a lot of the seats for people who deal with these things. But in the meantime, they shouldn't be out here making all those bellicose statements, right? They should, if they have to get their stuff together, they should get their stuff together before they're out here, especially when they're saying things that are completely wrong at the press briefing.
Exactly. So there's an article that I was reading by Tim Johnson and Anita Kumar, and they were addressing the substance of Iran's actions in testing the ballistic missile, which they did, which, the Trump administration is saying it's a clear violation. Iran is saying it's not. So I guess this is something they're trying to make it a wash. But in this article, they said that Iran is really testing how far they can go with the Trump administration. And they feel that maybe Michael Flynn specifically is trying to draw the line, not a red line, but draw a line in the sand to show Iran where this administration stands. What's your take on that? What signal do you feel, if any, is Iran trying to send? And then do you feel like this bellicose statement from Michael Flynn, basically from Donald Trump, is sending a signal back? Or do you feel like they have aggressive intentions like we've seen in times past?
I think it's really difficult to say at this point. I think a lot of people around the world, probably in Iran as well, did not expect Donald Trump to win and to be victorious. And I think because of that, a lot of them are having to recalibrate sort of their relationship and sort of see, how different will Trump be from the previous administration. So I think it's really difficult to say what their intent and their glancing at Trump is. I do know that they announced right after the executive order from Trump that they wouldn't reciprocate, so that any American who has an active Iranian visa, they're not going to be blocked or banned or anything. So I think there is that. But I think something people need to understand is sometimes the United States refers to Iran as like it's a total dictatorship. It's like, oh, just the Ayatollah just does whatever he wants or whatever. But that's not true. The fact of the matter is Iran is just like many other countries in that it has internal politics. There are more moderate factions of people in Iran. There's more hardline factions of people in Iran. And I think right now the moderates who won the last election, people like Rouhani, who's the president, Zarif, who's the foreign minister, I think they're probably looking at a way of saying, how can we hold on to power in this environment, Because the hardliners are going to say, look, the Americans brought this guy Trump in. He's saying all this stuff. He just I can't go see my cousin in New York. You're obviously, your worldview is wrong. Obviously, we have to be stronger and we have to show our teeth and that kind of thing. So I think it's a kind of a precarious situation for them. So far, I think they're trying to straddle a line where they can say, we're not going to go full hardline and scare off America and Europe and everyone, but also we have to show that we're not just going to be pushed around. And that is what you really would hope that, the Trump administration understands. They would understand that these things can often be a tense diplomatic situation, and that when you go macho and when you decide that you're going to be this way, that they're going to have their internal politics, which is going to tell them that they have to respond the same way, right? Otherwise, they're not going to keep their power, because right now, the moderate faction in Iran has an incentive to stick around. And if people feel like they're weak, this Trump guy, he's really bad, he's really antagonistic to us, and you're not saying anything, or you're not doing anything, then, and that I think is the scary part, and that's what these people should be concerned about, and that's what really makes someone like Michael Flynn, who I think tends to have a very antagonistic worldview, not a very diplomatic worldview, sort of dangerous in this administration, versus somebody like, I think, Jim Mattis or maybe even Rex Tillerson, who may have a more diplomatic worldview, who may not necessarily see this as the way to go. And maybe now that those two people are in place, they can assert themselves against the White House a little bit and try to push back. But, who knows?
Who knows? That's the question. Zaid, thanks so much for joining me. His article over at The Intercept is Press Secretary Sean Spicer falsely accuses Iran of attacking U.S. Navy vessel, an act of war. You wrote it along with Alex Emmons. Thanks so much for joining me, man.
It was great, Ben.
Awesome. 857-600-0518 if you want to join the conversation. We've got a lot more to cover before the end of the show. But I'll be doing another conversation on the authorization for use of force against Iran that's sponsored by a Democrat. Surprisingly enough, that's what Zaid from The Intercept, that's what he just mentioned. And so it's really in this environment where we have these attempts to show, I don't know if hubris is the word that I'm looking for, but the bellicose language, the ability to take us to war. We already have the legislation in the docket for Donald Trump to be able to do that, and it's being brought to us by a Democrat of all people, which I guess shouldn't be a surprise.